The call came through at 3:47 in the afternoon, and I almost didn't pick up because I was elbow deep under the sink trying to fix a leak my wife had been asking me about for 3 weeks. The number was my son's school. They said he had been waiting in the pickup line for 40 minutes and nobody had come. My wife was supposed to get him that day. I dried my hands on a shop rag, grabbed my keys, and told myself there was a reasonable explanation. Traffic. Dead phone. Something. I drove the 12 minutes to the school with the radio off, telling myself the reasonable explanation was coming, that by the time I pulled into the lot, she'd already be there, laughing, waving, apologizing. My son was standing on the curb with his backpack on, and his lunchbox in his hand, and a look on his face that no 6-year-old should have. The look of a kid who has started to understand that being forgotten is a real thing that happens to real people. I got out and held him for a long time before I put him in the car. There was a text waiting for me when I got back behind the wheel. It was from my wife. I read it twice before it made sense. I'm already at the airport. I need to go. I took what I needed from the account. Please don't make this harder than it has to be. He's better off with you anyway. That was it. No call. No conversation. No name of where she was going. Just that, and the implication that she had been planning it long enough to know exactly what she needed and exactly how much it would cost. My son asked from the back seat if Mom was making dinner. I said I wasn't sure yet, and I drove us home. Her name was Claire, my wife's name, and I want to be careful here because I'm not interested in making her into a villain for the sake of the story. I've spent 2 years now trying to understand what happened, and the honest answer is that I think she had been unhappy for a long time and didn't know how to say it. And then she met someone who made her feel something she hadn't felt in a while, and instead of doing the hard thing, she did the easy thing. That's the most charitable version I can give. There are less charitable versions. I'll try to stay with the charitable one. We had been married for 7 years. We met when I was 26, working a mid-level logistics job at a distribution center in Ohio. Living in an apartment I shared with a roommate, driving a car that needed new tires. She was a paralegal at a firm downtown. We got along easily. She was funny in the way that surprised you. Quiet most of the time, but when she said something, it landed. We built a life the way people do, one lease at a time, then a mortgage, then a son, then the slow accumulation of furniture and habits and inside jokes that starts to feel like permanence. I don't know when it started to come apart. Maybe it was never as solid as I thought. That's the thing nobody tells you, that a marriage can feel stable on the surface while something underneath it has already been shifting for years. The man she left with, I'll call him what I knew him as, which is my wife's coworker, had been at her firm for about 18 months before she left. She'd mentioned him a handful of times. Nothing that registered as a warning, just a name attached to a story about work, the way coworkers get mentioned. He was apparently from Portland originally, had traveled a lot, had some money from a tech exit a few years back. Those details I found out later. At the time, he was just a name. They went to Barcelona. I found that out from her sister, who called me 2 days after the text, clearly uncomfortable, clearly feeling like she owed me something, even if her loyalty was complicated. She said Claire had been talking about this for months. She said she had tried to talk Claire out of it. She said she was sorry. I thanked her and hung up and sat in my kitchen for a long time looking at the table. The account she had emptied was our joint checking, not our savings, which she either didn't think to touch or decided to leave alone. I never knew which. But the checking was where my direct deposit went, where the mortgage payment came from, where the utilities auto-drafted. There was 4 days before the mortgage hit. I had enough in savings to cover it, but only if I moved it immediately, and even then it left me thin for the month. I was not in crisis, but I was close enough to it that I could feel the edge. My son, whose name is the only name in this story, I won't change for privacy reasons. I'll call him what he called himself at 6, which was Boo, a nickname he gave himself that stuck. Boo knew something was wrong, but didn't know what. He was 6. He understood absence. He didn't yet have the vocabulary for abandonment. He asked about his mom every night for the first 2 weeks, and every night I said some version of, "Mom had to go somewhere for a while, but she loves you, and I'm here." I don't know if that was the right thing to say. I know it was the only thing I had. I called my own mother the first night. She drove 4 hours from Kentucky and was at my door before 8 the next morning. She didn't say much when she got there. She just came in and started making breakfast, and that was more than enough. My father, who was not an emotional man and has never in my life told me he loves me directly, called me 3 days later. He said, "You'll get through this. You're tougher than you think." And then he said he was putting a check in the mail and not to argue about it. I didn't argue. The legal process started faster than I expected, which is to say, it started slowly, but faster than I had braced for. I found an attorney through a coworker, a woman named nothing I'll name here, a family law attorney who had the particular quality of being completely unmoved by any story she heard, which I came to understand was not coldness, but a kind of professional steadiness that was actually useful. She didn't react to the abandonment piece. She just asked questions and took notes. She told me that physical custody was going to be straightforward given the circumstances. Claire had left the country without making any arrangements, without notifying anyone with authority over our son's welfare, without so much as a letter. The paper trail was clear. The text was time-stamped. The school pickup record existed. The international flight record existed, subpoenaed without drama. What was less straightforward was the financial piece. Ohio has specific statutes around marital asset dissipation. What Claire had done, clearing the joint account and leaving, met the definition in a way that gave my attorney something to work with. Not enough to make me whole overnight, but enough to matter. Claire had retained an attorney of her own remotely from Barcelona. This created a specific kind of absurdity. Depositions conducted over video calls with her sitting in what appeared to be a very nice apartment with whitewashed walls and afternoon light coming through a window while I sat in a conference room in Columbus trying to keep my voice level. I kept my voice level. Her attorney argued with a straight face that the money she had withdrawn was her equitable share of accumulated marital assets. My attorney had prepared for this. She put the mortgage statements on the table. She put the child care records on the table. She put the school pickup failure on the table. She let the judge look at all of it. The judge was a woman in her 60s who had clearly seen every variation of the story and had long since run out of patience for the version where the leaving parent frames the leaving as a form of self-actualization. She wasn't cruel about it. She was just precise. Boo started first grade that fall. I took the day off work and walked him to the classroom door and stood there in the hallway after he went in. Just standing there for probably longer than was necessary, because something about watching him walk through that door, backpack on, lunchbox in hand, the same image as the parking lot, but different, forward instead of abandoned, felt like something I needed to witness fully. His teacher sent me a note at the end of the first week that said he was doing well, that he was talkative, that he had already made 2 friends. I read it on my phone in the parking lot of a grocery store and sat there for a few minutes before I went in. My mother was still coming up on weekends. My father started calling more regularly, which for him meant once a week instead of twice a year. My sister, who lives in Denver and has 3 kids of her own, started texting me pictures of her kids doing things. Nothing profound. Just, here's your nephew losing a tooth. Here's your niece's soccer game. And I understood that she was trying to remind me that the world was still going, that there were still ordinary good things in it. I was not, for the record, falling apart. I want to be honest about that, because I think the version of this story that gets told sometimes is that the left-behind spouse is a ruin, and I wasn't. I was tired. I was angry in a way I was careful not to let Boo see. I had moments, usually late at night after he was asleep, where the full weight of it would sit down on me, and I'd have to just stay still for a while before it moved. But I was not a ruin. I had a job I was good at. I had a son who needed me to be present, and being needed is actually a significant thing when everything else is uncertain. I fixed a sink, eventually. A few weeks after she left, I just went back under there and finished the job. She came back 11 months later. I found out the same way I found out about Barcelona, which was through her sister, who had become something like an unlikely ally, not someone I was close to, but someone who felt a persistent sense of obligation toward Boo, that I think made her feel she had to keep the lines of communication open. She called and said Claire was back in the States, that the Barcelona situation had not gone the way Claire had expected, that Claire was staying with their parents temporarily. She said Claire wanted to see Boo. I told her I understood and that Claire was welcome to go through the proper legal channel for that, which was the visitation schedule that had been established by the court order that Claire's attorney had not contested. Possibly because contesting it would have required demonstrating some reason why Claire's unannounced international departure was actually compatible with the best interests of her child, which would have been a difficult argument. There was a pause on the phone. Her sister said, "She knows that. She's asking if you would, I think she's hoping you would consider something informal first." I said, "I'll follow the court order." The first visit was at a neutral location, a supervised arrangement that had been built into the order for exactly this scenario. A family services office, a conference room, a social worker sitting in the corner. Boo hadn't seen his mother in 11 months. He was 7 by then. I don't know what she expected from him. I wasn't in the room. I sat in a chair in the hallway and read the same paragraph of a book about 12 times. What I know is what the social worker told me afterward, and what Boo told me in his own way in the days that followed. He was polite to her. Not cold, he's not a cold kid, but polite. He answered her questions. He showed her a drawing he'd brought. He didn't cry, which the social worker noted as significant in a way that made my chest ache in a direction I hadn't expected. In the car afterward, he was quiet for a while. Then he said, "She looks different." I said, "Yeah, people sometimes change." He said, "She seems sad." I said, "I think she probably is." He was quiet again for a mile or two. Then he said, "Are we going home?" And I said yes. And he turned and looked out the window, and that was the end of it for that day. The court had scheduled a review hearing 6 months out from the original order, standard practice when there were ongoing custody considerations. By the time it came around, Claire had been back in Ohio for 4 months. She had a new job, something administrative, not law adjacent, a quieter life than the one she'd had. She was living in an apartment in a neighborhood I didn't know well, driving a car I didn't recognize. Her attorney, still the same one she'd retained remotely, appeared in person this time. My attorney put together a clear picture. 11 months of primary custody, school records showing consistent attendance, medical records showing all appointments current, teacher evaluations, a letter from my mother, a letter from Boo's pediatrician who had seen him regularly and noted his development as normal and his home environment as stable. Claire's attorney argued for expanded visitation on a graduated schedule, which was, honestly, not an unreasonable ask given that she had returned, that she had complied with the supervised arrangement, that she had not missed a scheduled contact. Her attorney made the argument carefully and without dramatics. The judge, a different one this time, a man who was quieter than the first judge but no less precise, asked Claire directly, "What do you want your son to know about why you left?" There was a pause in the room. Claire said that it had nothing to do with him. The judge nodded. He said he would be relying on that as a foundational truth in whatever arrangement they move forward with, and that any deviation from it in her communications with the child would be reflected in future proceedings. He granted the graduated visitation. I sat with it. I'm still sitting with it, if I'm honest. There's no clean ending to this kind of thing, no moment where the account is settled and everyone walks out even. What there is instead is the accumulation of ordinary days. Boo at breakfast, Boo at soccer practice, Boo losing the same tooth twice, the first time he swallowed it accidentally, the second time it came out clean, and he put it under his pillow with the gravity of someone completing a major transaction. She sees him twice a week now. He's adjusting to it in the way kids adjust to things, which is imperfectly and incrementally, and with a resilience that I'm pretty sure is not something adults teach children, but something children arrive with on their own. My mother stopped coming every weekend. She comes once a month now, which feels like the right calibration. My father and I talk on Sundays, briefly, about football mostly, occasionally about other things. It's not a new relationship. It's the same old one with a slightly better signal. I went back to work full-time through all of it. Got a promotion about 8 months after she left, not because I was trying to prove something, just because there was an opening and I was ready for it, and the distraction of more responsibility turned out to be useful. The apartment I'd had before we got married got rented out years ago by someone else. I'm still in the house. I fixed the leak under the sink. I fixed the gate latch in the backyard. I painted the bedroom that had been waiting for painting since we moved in. I did these things not because I had something to prove about capability or recovery, but because they needed doing and there was no longer anyone to wait for to help do them. Boo asked me once, about a year after everything, if I ever got sad about Mom leaving. I told him yes, sometimes. He said, "Me too." Then he said, "But you stayed." I said, "Yeah, I stayed." He went back to what he was doing, which was building something complicated out of Legos on the living room floor, Something that had no instructions and no clear intended form, just pieces being put together into whatever they were going to be. I watched him for a while before I went back to what I was doing. That's the whole story. That's all there is. I keep thinking about that moment in the school parking lot. Boo standing on the curb with his backpack on, lunchbox in hand, waiting. He wasn't crying, he was just waiting. And something about that image, a 6-year-old who had already learned to wait without knowing why, has stayed with me longer than any courtroom exchange or attorney fee or bank statement ever will. Here's what I've come to understand about what happened, not as a story about betrayal, but as a story about cause and effect in the most ordinary sense. The choices Claire made didn't exist in a vacuum. They accumulated. Every small decision to avoid the hard conversation, every month of letting something unsaid sit between us, every time she chose the easier exit over the more honest one, those things added up into the moment she sent that text from an airport terminal. And the choices I made afterward, to stay, to show up, to fix the sink and walk Boo to his classroom door and answer his questions without bitterness, those accumulated too. In the same quiet, compounding way. That's just how it works. What you do builds the structure you end up living inside. What I didn't expect was how much of this would come down to character. Mine and his. Not the dramatic kind of character that gets tested in a single moment of crisis, but the everyday kind. The kind that shows up at 6 a.m. when you're tired and making breakfast for a kid who needs to be at school in 40 minutes. The kind that keeps its voice level in a deposition when the other side is reframing your life in terms that barely resemble it. The kind that, when a 7-year-old asks why mom left, finds an answer that is honest enough to be real and careful enough not to do damage. I'm not a saint. I made mistakes in that marriage. I worked too much. I probably checked out in ways I didn't recognize at the time. But I knew the difference between right and wrong when it mattered, and I tried to act on that knowledge even when it cost me something. That's not heroism. That's just the baseline of being a decent person. And I think we undersell how much that baseline actually matters in a life. The intelligence piece. And I mean this not in the sense of IQ, but in the sense of judgment. Of reading a situation clearly and responding to what's actually there instead of what you wish were there. That was the thing that kept me from making it worse. I could have fought the visitation. I could have used Boo as leverage. I could have made sure every conversation he had with his mother went through a filter of my own grievance. I had the legal standing to make her life considerably harder than it needed to be. I chose not to. Not out of generosity toward her, but out of clarity about what my son needed, which was a mother who was present and a father who wasn't bitter. And that required me to think past my own anger. And the persistence, that steady, unremarkable daily persistence of just continuing to show up, that was the whole thing, really. Not a single act of courage, but 400 ordinary mornings in a row. Breakfast, school, work, dinner, homework, bedtime, repeat. Boo is doing well. He's building something out of Legos right now that has no instructions and no clear intended form. He's not worried about how it turns out, he's just building. I'm trying to be more like that.